If you have a question, please pose it in the chat box or the Q&A. Also, I encourage everybody, as you're signing into the chat box, putting your name and your location. Kayla just entered the virtual program for all 3 days of the EC convening. So if you click on that link, it will open up the URL and you can access the virtual program, which will give you a sense of the timeline and information about our keynote today, as well as our panelists for the other 2 days. Thank you for your patience, everyone. We will start in 1 more minute. Again, if you're just joining us, please put your name and your organization in the chat box. Also, check the chat box periodically as our staff member Kayla has uploaded the URL for the virtual program for the convening both today as well as the next 2 days. We'll get started in just a moment. Welcome everyone to CASA of Los Angeles' first virtual early childhood convening. My name is Lori Halderman and I'm the program manager for early childhood at CASA of Los Angeles. I will be your moderator for this convening on all 3 days. To start us off today, I would like to introduce Harriet Zaretsky, a committed CASA and the current president of the board of directors for CASA of Los Angeles. Harriet?
Good afternoon. I want to welcome you all to this early childhood convening, and I trust you will finish these webinars with a wealth of knowledge about children newborn to 5 years old. I want to thank the Atlas family for their long-term support. We are grateful to them for helping fund the transformative work we do. And I also want to express our appreciation to Lori Haldeman, a dedicated advocate supervisor and program manager for over 20 years at CASA LA. Putting this program together was a labor of love, and we're lucky to have such an intelligent, experienced, and thoughtful member as part of our team. Thank you, Lori. Having been with the CASA organization for over 25 years, mostly as a volunteer and most recently as a board member, I want to speak to your willingness to assist your communities and the children navigating the child welfare system. As the late Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg said, whatever community organization, whether a women's organization or fighting for racial justice, you will get satisfaction out of doing something to give back to the community that you will never get in any other way. I know firsthand of that satisfaction, and I want to share a story that reinforces that CASAs love to tell stories, but all the large and small acts that we do are very satisfying, but always give exposure to what's really happening with these children. One of my CASA cases was working with a family of 9 children. The youngest, only 17 months, was living in a foster home when I had my first visit with both he and this single gentleman who was his foster parent. I spent about an hour there, instinctively assessing that this boy could not sit, could not make eye contact, babble, hold a bottle, or connect in any meaningful way. He couldn't stand, and while large for his age, he was essentially immobile. The foster parent had this young child for over a year. And in the hour we were together, he never touched him or held him. When I left, I felt strongly that this boy was facing some sort of neglect and called the attorney, gave her the facts, and that night she sent out a social worker to remove him from the home. He was placed with a medically fragile foster family, and within 6 months was walking and talking. He had some words, and although his overall development was delayed, he was on his way to achieving the milestones of a child his age. It was only an hour of my time, but it changed this child's story. I urge you to talk to your supervisors, connect with your child's attorneys, social workers, but stay true to your role as an important observer in the child's life, and then advocate in his or her best interests. I'm going to segue for a minute because this morning I read an article in USA Today, which I would recommend you read, and it was about Florida and their Department of Children and Family Services. It was an upsetting story because Florida has changed their motivation from reuniting families to focusing on abuse. And so what was happening is all of a sudden they had all these kids out of homes suddenly, and they had no place to put them. And as the story evolved, these children were put in more peril, not less peril. The point of the story is I kept thinking, as I'm reading this lengthy article, that if a CASA had been on these cases, yeah, we can't solve every problem. Placements are difficult, but a lot of this worse abuse that ended up happening from their policy would not have happened. So never underestimate your importance. I understand and empathize that all of you have experienced frustration with cases due to bureaucracy, facts outside your control, even an issue like just connecting to a CASA team. Certainly during these 7 months of COVID, just seeing your youth has become an issue. But that's the beauty of being a CASA. Our patience, our consistency, our endurance, and our mission keeps us grounded when things get tough. Because CASAs are never thinking about themselves. We're always finding ways to help our youth. I know some of you have purchased critical items for your kids, driven to places that no one else would, lost sleep worrying, gone to graduations, connected them with siblings, and done other normal and heroic acts, just so we don't let these children down. Our reports show you are making a big difference in their outcomes, in finding them permanent homes and improving their lives. I think we forget sometimes that all children live with unpredictable outcomes, struggles, and triumphs. Learning to celebrate the victories and managing the challenges is part of our work. So thank you for being there, looking for justice, and finding hope for the children we serve. Now, I hope you enjoyed day one of advocating for young children and child welfare. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Harriet. So I'd like to thank all of you for creating time in your schedule to join us for this 3-part virtual convening about the youngest children in child welfare. My hope after all 3 days is that you will have a more comprehensive understanding of the unique needs of children ages 0 to 5 in child welfare. Additionally, you will see not just the importance, but the necessity to strengthen the capacities of the adults in these young children's lives in order for the little ones to not just survive the trauma and losses that they have experienced, but to thrive. I would be remiss if I did not extend a heartfelt thank you myself to the Atlas Family Foundation for their very generous support in making this virtual early childhood convening possible. Today, our keynote speaker, Dr. Elisa will share about development, trauma, personal and community adverse childhood experiences and their impact, the importance of caregivers in buffering these traumas, and the work of the Children's Clinic based in Long Beach. She will be touching upon some of the barriers to those supports that the children and the adults need. Next week on October 23rd, we will be hosting a panel who will be discussing how to collaborate and support parents whose young children ages 0 to 5 are in the system and the barriers that the families face. The panel will include the director of parents attorneys here in Los Angeles, service providers, a volunteer cultural broker, and a parent with lived experience. We will wrap up the convening on October 30th with a panel of community-based providers and educators who support young children's social and emotional development. They will review various services, barriers to those services, and the impact of racism on the social emotional development of young children. We have set aside 15 minutes at the end of each session for questions and answers for either the keynote today or the panelists on the following 2 days. Please use your Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen to send in your questions. A staff member will be monitoring the questions and we will try to answer them at the end of each convening session. We also have CASA staff monitoring the chat box if you choose to post a question to your fellow participants. We will also be uploading URLs for documents and resources during the course of the 3 days into the chat box. Think of the chat box as a virtual resource table. So I encourage you to keep an eye on that chat box as the speaker and panelists are speaking to you. We have already uploaded the URL for the virtual program for the convening, so make sure to take a look and upload it and look at it. You can also use the chat box to greet and network with each other if you would like. So I think I've done all the logistics for now, so let's get started on our convening. Normally convenings are held in person and you get a sense of who is in the room. Well, this is 2020 and nothing is normal this year. So I have the privilege of knowing who is here because I was monitoring the registrations. However, I would like for you to have an idea of who's attending this webinar. So I'm going to be launching a poll that I would appreciate if you would answer. I'm going to launch it now. We'll take about a minute for you to complete it, and then we'll review the results together. We're about halfway done with the poll. I'll be closing the poll in about 20 seconds or so, if you would like to get finished. Okay. 10 more seconds if you want to put your information into the poll. The answers are anonymous. Okay, I'm closing the polling now. So let's see who's here. I want to share about 50%, 57% of you are related to CASA. That could be CASA volunteers, CASA staff, CASA board. We do have CASA staff and volunteers from throughout California on this webinar. We have 4% of court partners here today. 19% of the attendees are from Los Angeles Department of Children and Family Services. 11% of the attendees today are community-based organization. 3% of attendees are from universities or educational forums. And then we have 7% of the folks here today are from a variety of places. In terms of our second question, are infants and toddlers too young to be impacted by trauma? 96% of you said no, and that's one of the things we'll be addressing is how young children are impacted by trauma. And on our last result, the social and emotional development, one of those oopsies, my numbers were off. We have 1, 3, and 4 questions, so thank you for understanding that. The last question, 97% of you felt that social and emotional development of young children is linked to their adult health. So we are on the right path. So now what I would like to do is introduce our keynote speaker today, Dr. Elisa Nicholas. Dr. Nicholas is a pediatrician, a clinical professor, and chief executive officer of the Children's Clinic, serving children and families TCC is an innovative and progressive system of 13 community health centers and a mobile clinic that provides comprehensive trauma and healing-informed health and wellness services to 40,000 patients of all ages throughout Greater Long Beach area and the South Bay. Dr. Nicholas has driven pioneering initiatives to decrease health disparities in people with chronic diseases such as asthma, diabetes, and obesity. She has designed and implemented and participated in numerous national, state, and local community collaboratives, including Long Beach Alliance for Food, of toxic stress and exposure to adversity and trauma of infants. Oh, okay. Am I unfrozen now? Okay. Thank you for letting me know I froze. Very Zoom-like. Under her guidance, TCC was the first certified trauma-informed organization in Los Angeles County. She has lectured extensively on trauma-informed approach and childhood adversity. Dr. Nicholas has also had a long history of working to influence health system and policy change and is actively serving on the Los Angeles County Supervisorial District 4 appointee to the Los Angeles County Community Prevention and Population Health Task Force and Commissioner for the Los Angeles County Hospitals and Healthcare Delivery Commission. A graduate of UCLA School of Medicine, Dr. Nicholas completed a pediatric residency at the Yale University School of Medicine and a preventative medicine residency, while a Robert Wood Johnson Clinical Scholar Fellow at the UCLA School of Medicine. She also earned her Master's of Science in Public Health from the UCLA Fielding School of Public Health and has received numerous awards for her work. Throughout her career, Dr. Nicholas's goal has been and is to address health inequities and improve the quality of life for children and families we serve in our community. Welcome, Dr. Nicholas.
Thank you so much, Lori. It's such a pleasure to be here. So I want to thank you for inviting me. I've been so impressed with the CASA work for many years. And so I'm really honored to be here. And I think this will fit in well with the next two lectures that you have. I apologize for if I hesitate a little. I'm very used to interacting actively with my audience, and this will be a new experience for me. I've been on panels, but not one where I'm just speaking and can't see anyone. So apologies. So you can see the objectives. Really, I think the group knows about childhood adversity, what I can tell from the answers to the questions. I apologize if you hear sirens in the background. I'm right across the street from the Children's Hospital in my office. So, and we're really going to talk about promotion of healing and resiliency and the protective factors, touch a little bit on the racial inequities and discrimination as a trauma and COVID-19. And then let you know the role of physicians in early identification and responding, and how we can all partner with children and families and caregivers to protect, nurture our children, there's a typo there, and their caregivers. So when I looked up CASA, I saw your core values, which are very close to ours, and your color scheme matches ours too. So after doing many years of this work, and describing childhood adversity and trauma and how we heal and protect people from the adversity that can come from the toxic stress, I often get to the point, it's just about leading with love and kindness. And I was very pleased to see that at the top of your core values. And I think you truly reflect that. I want to compliment you on the wonderful article in the LA Times recently too, to talk about your work. So I'm just going to touch a little bit on the work that we're doing at TCC. I'm going to go through these very quickly, but I just wanted you to see what we've really done at TCC is try to take the learnings that we've had from the leaders in the field, the Bruce Perrys, the Jack Shonkoffs, Dr. Vander Kolk, Alicia Lieberman, Dr. Burke Harris, and Futures Without Violence and other groups, and really apply it to the work that we've done. But we've been doing this work for a very, very long time. I came 31 years ago, and we've really grown through the years and been able to create the kind of programs that can really hopefully change the lives of our families. This is our mission, and very common to other missions. And these are the comprehensive services. So I want to point out some of them is that we have a medical legal partnership with LAFLA. We're the first LA County Reach Out and Read to emphasize, the cuddle factor of reading to your child. We have an American Indian program. We see all ages now. Our name is actually, we're doing business as TCC Family Health to really reflect that we just don't do clinical work. We do a lot in the community, and we see all ages. And we based our approach on health and wellness. People used to question why I was doing the things I was doing at the clinic, and why don't you just look at ears and listen to hearts? And I said, but health is much more. 80% of health comes from other things other than direct health care. So we use the World Health Organization definition, health equity focus, looking at the social determinants of health, population health, socio-ecological model, and strengthening families. I'm not going to go into detail on these much at all. I just want to show you the next one. Let's see. There we go. So I think most of you should have seen this. The health is a state of complete physical, mental, and I added in spiritual and social well-being, not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. This has led my work since I started medical school. So, and I think you all know about equality versus equity. We only serve low-income populations in our community. Most of them are children of color and families, and we serve many with disabilities and also the homeless. And we, for many years, have been the health center and the healthcare provider in the community that DCSF would bring their children to. I was once on the commission that oversaw DCSF many years ago. So we've worked very closely with them through the years. And I personally have followed many families, both when their child was with a relative because they were taken away, but also when they were reunited with their families after the parents got interventions and help. These are the social determinants of health, and I think most people are familiar. And these are really the kind of the upstream things that can lead to the adversities in many ways. And we're going to talk about that a little more. Population health is when you focus on a group that, let's say, children with asthma, and really look at them from an individual standpoint. This is a graphic of it, the family, the clinical expertise, but also the physical environment and the community support and action. And then the strengthening families approach, we'll touch on this a little bit later. Also, I bet many of you are very familiar with this. So our journey began, well, as a community pediatrician and a pediatrician with a degree in public health, I also worked for 2 years in the Child Crisis Center at UCLA, at Harbor UCLA, when I first returned from my training and a year in Africa, working in Kenya and Uganda, where I saw a lot of trauma because in Uganda, children were separated from their families, they were orphaned, and it was just an incredible, heartbreaking thing to see. But what I saw was the strength among the people that have gone through so much. But in 2012, the Early Childhood Task Force or committee wrote a policy statement. And that really started a refocus on this through the American Academy of Pediatrics, which I belong to, and especially in the community pediatrics section. So we started to attend many webinars and reading all the articles, and were introduced to Bruce Perry and Jack Shonkoff. And then we were offered the opportunity to apply for an Every Child Bright Beginnings initiative. And Every Child Foundation is a wonderful foundation in LA County. And they award $1 million every year to one organization so they can do some innovative work. And we were very blessed to be awarded that work. So we, at that time, that funding went towards our journey to become a trauma-informed care practice and certification. And then we joined Johns Hopkins Collaborative, We helped found the Trauma Informed Long Beach, and I worked with Center for Youth Wellness as the California ACEs Policy Working Group. There were about 20 of us, 25 of us. It was an amazing group. Then I was put on the 4CA Steering Committee, and it goes on. And now we are working with the ACEs Aware project at a state level that was spearheaded by Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris, who's now our Surgeon General and a leader in this field. And I've been very honored to be able to work with her through the years. So what is a trauma-informed organization? It really is one that realizes the widespread impact of trauma and adversity and the path to recovery. It recognizes that trauma is very, very common in our patients that we serve and in our own employees, and that we respond in a manner that is sensitive, both in our policies, procedures, practices, and setting, and that we have organizational practices that do not intentionally re-traumatize others. I don't like the name trauma-informed organization, and we'll talk a little bit later. And after doing this education for probably since 2013 or 14, it's time for us to talk about healing and flourishing, and we'll talk about that a little later. So these are the kind of projects that we've had within the organization for infants and families. We started as much upstream as we could, and this was our Every Child Bright Beginning. We really got trained everyone. We created an amazing advisory group. Some of the groups, the agencies that work with us may be on the call. We had almost every mental health provider for children as on our advisory committee. And then we targeted the 0 to 3 population, started screening for many different things, both social determinants of health, but also adversity, stratified, and then did interventions for that. And then we were invited to participate in Project Dulce. This was developed by Dr. Robert Sege, who is very active in Boston. And then we were awarded Healthy Families America. We now have many, many community health workers that work with the most vulnerable in our population. So our pregnant women now are being screened and being linked to Healthy Family America family specialists that go into their homes until the age of 3. And they have been incredibly successful and helped many families. And this has been a very well-studied program, Healthy Families America. And then we have our medical legal partnership. And most recently, we have received Mental Health Services Act money from LA County DMH for Innovation 2, where we created Flourishing Families, Long Beach. And we're looking at the 0 to 5 population and also to the intergenerational to look at how we can create kind, connected, and flourishing communities. The 0 to 3 strategy wants to build trauma resilient families, targeting the 0 to 5, especially those who have experienced trauma. And we're focusing on Latino, African American, and Cambodian communities. And then our strategy 7 is intergenerational, which is beautiful. I really am happy we're doing that work also. So what is trauma? It is an experience that leaves a person intensely threatened and can trigger physical, psychological, and emotional symptoms. And if left untreated, these effects can linger long after the events. And it's different for different people, depending on what the trauma is, what their support systems are, and what the personality of the child and the family are. And we often are talking about ACEs, but I really want us to touch on the community trauma factors because this is so important. And we know that those community factors can lead to adversity in the individual family and home. So these are some of the community factors that we need to address and really keep in mind. I mean, if someone is hungry, if someone can't feed their child, if they don't have a home, if they don't have a job, if they're living in poverty, they're going to snap more, they're going to be more stressed, and they won't be able to be as focused on nurturing their child as they would have been otherwise. And we know that every time there's a recession, that the rates of domestic violence increase, the rates of child abuse increase, and the rates of substance abuse increase, all of which are ACEs. So I think it's very important to focus on this. This is another way of looking at the symptoms of community trauma and how we need to address those. and the different strategies, housing, justice, economy, education, all are so important in this work and in our advocacy work. So let's talk about the classic trauma, toxic stress, and childhood adversity. I'm going to go fairly quickly because I think this group knows a fair amount about it, but if not, we can circle back at the question and answer. So these are sources of childhood trauma, and in the child and family, we know them as the ACEs, and then they also, it's a repetition of some of those broader social factors. And understanding trauma is very important. Trauma is pervasive, its impact is broad and diverse, and its impact is deep and life-shaping. And especially interpersonal violence is often self-perpetuating. As a pediatrician, I have rarely seen a parent who physically abused their child who wasn't themselves physically abused. It does not mean that every parent who is physically abused or verbally abused or neglected will do that to their child. But I think almost all parents that do that to their child were abused as children. And so one of our most important roles is to really try to break that cycle. And I love the work of Elisa Lieberman, and we'll touch on that later, about angels in the nursery and how do we bring out the angels and not the ghosts in our parents. Trauma is insidious and differentially affects the more vulnerable. And it affects how people approach services and many different services. And the service system itself can be re-traumatizing, but healing is possible. So what are the adverse childhood experiences? I think most of you know this. It's gotten a lot of press. We have our whole ACEs Aware program now, and we're screening in our clinics for ACEs and some of the social determinants of health. But it's the abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction. Emotional, physical, sexual abuse, neglect, emotional and physical, domestic violence or interpartner violence, substance abuse, mental illness and divorce, and an incarcerated family member. And I think one of the things that I like to try to focus on as we look at the ACEs is what is it that can promote these things happening or make them happen more frequently, but also what is it about these different ACEs that affect the child so much? For example, an incarcerated family member. I've thought about this a lot, and I was very honored to be on a panel of children of incarcerated parents put together several years ago, and it was so eye-opening. And many times I think a physician thinks, well, if the parent's in jail, they must have been abusive or a bad person and not been close to the child. But when you really ask the children, many of them, they were very close to their parents, and what happened when they were put in jail, and many times for low-level offenses, especially that occur with many of the ethnic and cultural groups and poverty level that we're working with, they lost their parent. They couldn't visit them, and they lost the income from them. So looking at the adverse childhood experience with a different lens, I think is important. So, and I think what we want to assess is, what is it about the adverse childhood experiences, and what is it that can cause those biological, epigenetic, and hormonal changes within us? So there are 3 levels of stress: positive, tolerable, and toxic. So I don't want people to think that all stress is negative. We all need some stress in our lives to achieve and learn, especially children, young children. I like to think about those little toys. I think Rubbermaid made them, where you had to put the square in the square hole. It was a ball, and you got the star. And if you didn't get stressed by trying to figure out how to do that, you probably would never have learned how to do that. So some stresses are important. Tolerable stress, the difference between positive and tolerable and toxic sometimes and many times depends on your support systems. And so what is tolerable for some people could be toxic for others. A tolerable stress is a serious and temporary stress response, but it's buffered by supportive relationships. So if someone is going through a difficult divorce and they don't have people that support them, that will listen to them and will help them through their trauma and stress of a divorce, they may go into a toxic stress state and they may become suicidal. But if they have support systems and people that care about them, it will be a tolerable one. But a toxic is really a prolonged activation of the stress response system in the absence of protective relationships. So we know that this is a little bit hard to view, but we have two sides of this. And, you know, in the roots, you can have things that will nurture you and help you grow. And I'm moving closer because it's hard for me to see. So on the right, facing the camera, you have the supportive ones that help you grow leaves and have a fulfilled and productive life. And on the left, you have the traumas that can cause the negative outcomes if you don't have those protective factors. So, and I think this, you know, we've wanted to do this in our community and have our community put in what are the protective and what are the stressors in the community. And I'm planning on doing that with our flourishing families in the near future. So this is a chart from the AAP. It's helping foster and adoptive families cope with trauma. We're going to send this out to you. It is a really wonderful document that explains some of the stressors, both in the child and the family, and some of the responses. And these are complicated slides, but if you see it in the context of the whole document, I think it's very helpful, especially to DCSF workers and CASA advocates, and I think anyone that's working with children and child welfare. So we know that childhood adversity, if not buffered and supported and assisted with, can have significant adversity in childhood and in later in life. And it can lead to toxic stress, again, if it's not buffered, it's not supported, and even epigenetic changes, disruptions in brain, architecture, and behavioral allostasis. And the allostatic load is really, is the process of the body achieving balances through changes. And these can lead to poor adult outcomes. And we know that childhood stress can cause the chronic fight, flight, or freeze, and that is through the cortisol and norepinephrine. And that can changes in brain architecture and really lead to that hyper-responsive stress response. And really, if you get into this chronic fight or flight and you have those triggers, what we need to do is really help the child or the parent calm themselves and try to cope with this so that they can decrease that stress cycle. This is another way of looking at that. So the human brain, of course, mediates all emotions, and it's responsible for thousands of complex functions, and it's really one of the most amazing organs in our body. And it is part of our body. We kind of separate it out. But there are four major portions: the brainstem, diencephalon, limbic system, and cortex. And the cortex is the most sophisticated, and it is really where we do our, our thoughtful responses. And the further down you go into your most basic freeze, fight, or flight modes. And the stress hormones are the cortisol, norepinephrine, and those are the ones that get us to the stress response. And then oxytocin, which is kind of the warm, cuddly one, and associated more with women and breastfeeding and that. And it's the anti-stress hormone. And maybe someday we'll be able to, package that. And it can be produced in men. And that's why actually men who are home on paternity leave are much more bonded to their children than men who are not home on paternity leave. So I think it's really important for us to allow those kind of policy changes that have come over the last few years. So a stress mode, I think, as most of us know, it can't respond or learn as well or process. And it's like when you're taking an exam, if you're slightly stressed, you're going to probably do better. You're going to focus more. But if you are overly stressed, your brain shuts down. And what we want is a brain that can be stressed, but then you have those times in between to be calm. We know that the more positive adverse childhood experiences, the more you have both mental health outcomes that are worse and also physical outcomes. So the suicide attempt with somebody that has a high ACE rate is 12 times the normal rate, the baseline rate of someone who has 0 ACEs. And heart attacks are 2.3 times higher. Heart attacks are much more common than suicide attempts. So these are huge physical health, mental health, and public health issues that we need to address, that we need to go upstream and really try to prevent with interventions and looking at the reasons and some of the causes of these ACEs. And this is a very simplified little diagram that with increased ACEs and adversity, you have decreased executive functioning and judgment in children, and increased school failure, behavioral problems, and substance abuse in children. And this is really the ACEs and the prevalence of, for mental health issues, that the higher your ACE score, the more of the prevalence. And this is on a scale from 0 to 80. This is for chronic diseases, which is on a scale from 0 to 18%. So it's a smaller percentage, but these are much more higher incidence in general population. So in early childhood, the rapidly developing brains are very vulnerable. And so that early severe trauma can be associated with reduced size in the brain and the cortex. And early childhood trauma and toxic stress they can have different reactions to this. And I think most of you that have worked with young children that have been in the foster care system and the child welfare system, they can't verbalize their reactions. They really can't anticipate danger. They can't protect themselves. They're too small, and they really don't understand what's going on. And I think your president gave a good kind of description of what you find in those young children. Is this my video? So this is a video. I really want people to look at this Changing Minds Now. It's a very good site that was developed with Futures Without Violence, one of my favorite groups. And I hope you like this.
Emotional effects of childhood trauma are well known, but new scientific research reveals that a child's positive and negative experiences can shape and reshape the brain. Research suggests that the more a child witnesses violence, the more neural connections are created in regions of the brain that involve fear, anxiety, and impulsiveness, while fewer are created in regions that involve reasoning, planning, and behavioral control. The good news is the young brain is malleable for plastic, and fostering stable, supportive relationships can prevent or help reverse this damage, resulting in lifelong benefits for the child's learning, behavior, and overall health. So how can you help a child in your life? Just remember these 5 healing gestures. Celebrate them with a compliment or by applauding their efforts. Comfort them by staying calm and patient. Listen to them and show an interest in their passions. Collaborate with them by asking their opinions. And inspire them with new ideas. With these everyday gestures, you can help a child look forward to a bright future.
Oops. I think I moved too fast here. I'm having trouble moving things. Let's see. Okay. Sorry. So I hope you like that. That's and that site is wonderful. You can click by age and by, if let's say you're in education, medical, community, and really look at different tools to use. So this is a child's response to trauma. This is from an AAP Pediatrics Toolkit on childhood adversity and toxic stress. In the young children, as I mentioned, they tend to respond more with detachment, numbing, compliance, and fantasy, more common in females and children undergoing trauma and children unable to defend themselves. And often it is, the pediatricians think, oh, it's depression or it's ADHD inattentive or it's developmental delay. And what's really important is that we continue to think about childhood adversity and what's going on at home. And, a good pediatrician knows to ask, is there something going on at home or something going on at school or something that's happening in their life or any changes? I'm having trouble changing my slides. I think I need Erin to come and help me. I apologize. Oh, next. Sorry. I don't know how to get back there.
Hi, everyone. While Dr. Nicholas is getting it worked on, just be patient. As we all know, Zoom, rooms, webinars are all full of bumps and blips as we work through. So this is just practicing moderate or positive stress, yes, and having buffering adults around us, yes, to help us get it through.
To get me through this. So we went through this yesterday. I can't figure out how to get back. So I apologize. So here we go. Next one. And this is in older children. So, you know, the older children, they're more hypervigilant, aggressive, anxious, or have an exaggerated response. And it's more common in males, especially ones who have witnessed violence and that are able to fight or flee. And these are the kids that are sometimes called the conduct disorders, the oppositional defiance disorder, which used to be reasons for kicking kids out of school, but we don't do that as much anymore. And I'm very pleased about that because, yes, again, we need to look at what are those reasons for those kids acting that way. And really in the schools working on restorative justice and anger management classes. And these are some of the child's bodily functions that can change from trauma: difficulty falling asleep, difficulty staying asleep, nightmares, rapid eating, food hoarding, loss of appetite, so eating too much, not eating enough, eating disorders, and then stooling and toileting disorders. And again, when we have a child that comes in that we've been following since birth, and they start demonstrating some of these things, it's always so important to ask, again, is there something going on? And, you know, what is happening in the life? And not just think of medical reasons, but think of the psychosocial issues that could be present. And then in the infant and toddlers, you'll see that they have some difficulty acquiring milestones. And, you know, children that are failing to thrive or children who have difficulty getting these milestones many times can be experiencing trauma. So sometimes they'll have severe tantrums, they'll be aggressive with other children, and their attachment may be impacted. And I was telling Lori yesterday, as a pediatrician, when I have like a toddler coming in and they just go to me immediately and hold on to me and cling to me, I'm really worried. I'm really good with kids, and I've been working with children for so many years, and I know how to engage them and get to their level and, you know, talk quietly and play with them. But most children will not go to you and cling to you. And so I think we really need to look for those attachment, both, you know, they have a very flat affect, but they're overly affectionate. So, and we need to understand that these are their ways of coping and protecting themselves. So this is another document, and I'm not going to go through it in detail, but I think that's from that Helping Foster and Adoptive Families Cope with Trauma. This, again, I really like this. We're going to get this link out to you, but it tells you what you'll see, you know, why is it occurring and what can we do about it? And, you know, it's really, don't take these behaviors personally. Don't try to stop it when it's happening. You know, lower your voice. I said, you know, channel Mr. Rogers and T. Barry Brazelton if you can. You know, that slow and the quiet and just lowering your tone of voice and, you know, coming down to the child's level and, you know, telling them they'll be okay. And if they're angry, that's okay. But really trying to understand why they may be responding that way. I think we've all heard stories or seen stories of kids that are triggered. And I think that's the other thing. I don't have a specific slide on triggering, but Dr. Bruce Perry, a child psychiatrist that I'm sure most of you have read about or heard speak, and he's amazing. He told the story of a very quiet girl in a, you know, early, you know, kindergarten or first grade. And she was always this model, quiet, hardworking little girl. And one day the teacher put on some country music for them to do coloring to or something. And this little girl like flipped out and started crying and screaming and acting out. And the teacher was so baffled because she had been so quiet. And it turns out that was the music that the stepfather put on when he sexually abused her, so nobody would hear. And so you don't always know, why somebody's responding the way they are, and really trying to, to see, and think about what could have happened to them and how we could try to understand and calm them, and then, quietly explore things at a time when it's appropriate with the proper resources. So I think knowing that the usual parenting practices may not work, learn to notice and avoid the triggers, keep the routines. I think that's super important for all young children. Allow the child to have some decisions they can make. If they are uncomfortable coming close, respect that and slowly, move, closer and closer as the trust develops, and be patient. And I know it's very hard when somebody has been very hurt and they can't trust. That takes a lot of patience and a lot of time. And there are a lot of resources to help caregivers and parents with this. So I think the other thing is to really, talk about the trauma just of being in the child welfare system. There's stigma. And I think most children, these are more older children, they want to be normal. They don't want to have a stigma of trauma. Many times they think it's their fault. They don't trust adults. Sometimes they never had the support from their caregiver. And many times, the intergenerational nature of trauma, it's that the parents, they don't know how to be loving. They were never parented that way, and helping them to be able to engage with their children in more positive ways. So the emotional pain is often acted out from the children and the parents. And then I think sometimes the way a child is taken away from the family system, or the parent is taken away. I think a lot of the trauma from children whose parents are incarcerated comes from the initial trauma of police coming into your house with guns drawn and taking a father or mother away. And I hear about the trauma from that often in some of my work. The really misunderstanding of their behaviors. And I think it's important, and I think all of you probably know this, that most children that are in the foster care system have experienced trauma or adversity. So I'm going to touch a little bit on the COVID-19 and kind of the unintended consequences of safer at home. I think what COVID-19 did was many things. One, it was really disrupted all the routines for children and caregivers. And so they were not going to school, they weren't going to preschool, the caregivers have lost their jobs, the support systems in the community disintegrated, they've been coming back slowly, the safety net resources have all changed, and the technology or lack of technology that was, that some of our families have faced is profound. And all the health, social, racial, and equity have been increased and highlighted through this pandemic. So I think it's increasing the stress and the traumas. We've seen a rise in domestic violence, child neglect, and abuse through this. And being safer at home is not always true. And we've trained our staff that are doing telephone visits and telephone follow-ups for even the home visiting and the health visits to really try to, in a safe way, ask about safety at home. The other thing is that if the child is in the child welfare system, they may be unable to see or touch their parents. And that's really hurting their necessary attachments to, continue to be able to see their parents if it's appropriate. And I mentioned again, the disruption in services and support and the financial hardships. And then the fear, seeing everybody in masks and hearing about everybody dying, children pick up on those anxiety. And if there's anxiety in the adults about COVID, there will be anxiety in the children. They're like little emotional sponges, and they will manifest in depression, acting out, or shutting down. I think we went through this, and we want to make sure that we're ensuring the child's physical safety during this time and their emotional safety and well-being. And then I want to touch on racism and ACEs. I think, you know, we could go on for hours on this, but it's very important that discrimination is experienced by many groups, and racism is a risk factor for toxic stress. And it can be experienced as interpersonal or vicarious threat causing the toxic stress report, systemic and institutional discrimination, racism that leads to increased poverty, poor housing, lack of opportunity that can lead to, you know, the ACEs. And so poverty, as we mentioned in the community section, can lead to more ACEs. So really they are really, that racism can lead to ACEs that can lead to toxic stress, and that can lead to the poor outcomes. But again, with those protective factors and in the community, we can really address this. But at a policy level, we need to own this and we need to address this. So we need to take special consideration for these at-risk populations, and really with cultural humility and culturally competent approaches, and be aware of the implicit and explicit biases in our systems, in our services, in ourselves. Nobody is perfect, but we really need to all realize that we can do better, and we need to really recognize and acknowledge that. We know that internalized racism can harm the child's development, and we want them to be proud of who they are, and exposure to explicit and implicit biases is not good. And all of us need to advocate, educate, and support each other. Just because, you know, you are living all these things does not mean that you can't flourish. And I want to refer people to Jeffrey Duncan Andrade's work. It's Roses Out of Concrete. It's a TED Talk. And he talks about teens in Oakland who have faced so much adversity, but yet can flourish eventually with the right supports and the right services. So poor outcomes can be mitigated or lessened by protective factors and trauma and healing informed care. Therefore, we need to presume that the clients we serve have a history of traumatic stress and exercise universal precautions by creating systems of care that are trauma, and I like to say healing informed. This is from 2005, and we're going to talk about, you know, trauma or asset-based informed healing organizations. So the more protective factors we have, the better our children and families will do, and the more risk factors, the poorer they'll do. And it really is a fulcrum, but we really can build those. And as Alicia Lieberman, you know, has written in Angels in the Nursery, you need to find those angels, and you need to find those times in parents' lives when they felt loved. It might not have been from their parents, but it may have been from a grandmother, an aunt, and really help people reach into those areas. And if all of us are kind to each other, and when somebody's looking, you know, sad or depressed, that we offer help. I don't know if any of you have seen the video of the young man who was very depressed and was on his way to jump off the San Francisco bridge, the Golden Gate Bridge. He had had severe bipolar disorder and depression for years. And he finally decided to take his life, and he got on the bus, and he was on the bus and he was crying, and nobody asked him how he was. And not the bus driver, not people on the bus. He got off the bus at the Golden Gate Bridge. He was standing on the bridge about to jump, and somebody asked him to take their picture because they were on vacation or a honeymoon. So he took their picture, and the person never said, "How are you doing?" And he jumped off the bridge. And the minute he jumped off the bridge, he realized he didn't want to die. And the whole way down, he was saying, "I don't want to die. I don't want to die." And he survived. And so he now lectures on this. And he said, if one person had just asked me, "Is everything okay? And can I help you?" I wouldn't have jumped. And so really, I think that's, you know, that's what we all need to do on an individual basis as we address those systemic and community issues also. So these are the protective factors for the young child from the Center for the Study of Social Policy, really enhancing parental resilience and supporting parents most people that have children want to be good parents. They want to love their child. They sometimes don't have the skills. They don't have the economic ability. Really developing social connections. Social isolation, to me, through all my years of practice, is one of the biggest risk factors for families who are struggling. People need each other. We're social beings, and we need to have people around us. And under COVID, this is a big challenge. Really building the knowledge of parenting and child development. I find that for physical abuse, many parents that are physically abuse their children, they have unrealistic expectation of normal child development. And I think that's really, really important. If you expect a child at 3 to never have a toileting accident, you're going to be very upset when they have a toileting accident. But most children at 3 still have some toileting accidents. So really understanding them. And one of the most important things that people never want to fund is concrete support in times of need. Diapers, food, housing. Those are huge stressors if you don't have them. And then really fostering social and emotional competence. And all these lead to a healthier parent-child relationship. So it's the power of relationships, and that can really lead to resiliency. And it's critical. The parental caregiver relationship is critical to stress regulation, and stable caring relationships are key. And promoting the child's physical health, nutrition, checkups, access to nature, warmth, reliability, sensitivity, empathy, and safety, and emotional attunement all lead to better attachment. And I ask each of you to really think back on those relationships in your own life that made you feel safe and loved and warm. And, some of us have more than others, but hopefully everybody's had someone who cared about them. And I think that's what the Angels in the Nursery really tries to get at, is how do we get to that? So it is not programs that change people, it's people. And again, it's the power of relationship, and we need to focus on improving and building those connections, listening, caring, proving to children that we as adults are trustworthy, normalizing those experiences, and connecting rather than teaching, just being present and connecting. And I think we're all so busy that we sometimes forget to just be present with a child and with a loved one and with ourselves. And instead of saying what's wrong with you, you can ask what's happened to you, or even better, what's right with you. So active listening, naming emotions, caring about people's concern, and really being connected to be present, and making people feel safe. And I know that the mental health, people, when doctors think of safety, we think you're not going to fall out of your car seat, or you're not going to fall out of a window. But there's really the physical, emotional, and social, and cultural, and relational safeties that we all need. And it's really one of the most important aspects of mental health, and being truly heard and feeling held in someone else's mind and heart. So I think moving from trauma-informed to asset-informed care and early childhood care. I don't know how many of you know Ellen Galinsky's work. I mean, Ellen Galinsky I've known of and talked to through the years. She was the founder and president of the Families and Work Institute, and now she is the chief science officer at the Bezos Family Foundation. And she's still at the Family and Work Institute, and has done some amazing work through the years. And she wrote I think it's a blog, where she said, I don't like the trauma-informed name. And we've been saying that in our organization since we became trauma-informed certified. And how can we really kind of change that mindset? I think it's incredibly important to identify that the trauma and the adversity in our families, so we can address it, own it, and try to prevent it, and try to help people heal that are not doing well. But I think we also need to recognize that adversity is not destiny, and that stereotyping people, and I really worry about people that live in rough neighborhoods and have a lot of trauma, both in and violence in their community, that people think they're going to be damaged goods, and why invest in them? And that worries me tremendously. And the last thing I want is for people not to invest in those kids who have had adversity in their life because their brain's ruined and they're never going to be anything. And that's not true. I mean, those epigenetics changes can change. They can go back, and brains can regrow. You know, we can still make progress even if when children have had a lot of trauma and adversity. And people shouldn't be defined by their trauma. So we really need to start focusing on building on children and families' assets. And I'm seeing this more and more in the literature and in the work that's going on. And certainly in our trainings, we're trying to add this in and really talk on that. The last thing we need is for the families that we serve to be even more demonized and discriminated against than they already are in many ways, and celebrate the incredible strength that so many of our families have that have been through so much adversity in their lives. It's, you know, quite remarkable. And if we recognize that, I think we will all be better stewards of this work. And then I've been touching on this already, that, you know, in 1975, Dr. Freyberg talked about the ghost in the nursery. And really what it is trying to see and identify those adversities in the parents. I mean, I think going prenatally and identifying things before the children are born is so important, so we can help those parents. But, you know, many people had many things that happened in their childhood. And when I started this work, I just started asking my families that I've been serving for years, tell me about your childhood. Were you loved? Did you feel love? Were there any bad things that happened in your childhood? And many of them had many good things, but many of them were a 3-generation family of sexual abuse. And they were unable to protect, you know, their daughter when they turned the same age that they were when they were sexually abused. And if I hadn't asked that question when they had the newborn there, I think we wouldn't have broken that cycle. But I asked those questions and I didn't judge, and I told them they weren't alone and it was not unusual for this to happen and it's not their fault. And I got them referred to some support groups. And, you know, the one person that I worked with, she now works for me and she's doing well. And she's really kind of turned the life around for her youngest daughter and really turned the life around for the older daughter too, and helped her with her issues. So, you know, recognizing those ghosts is incredibly important, but it doesn't end there. I mean, those intergenerational ghosts can often be passed on to the next generation. But with Alicia Lieberman's articles, Angels in the Nursery, and there's a wonderful video that she's done recently, and is really helping them find those experiences where they felt loved, the parents, and having them work on bringing those back and connecting with their children and creating shared positive memories with their own children and fostering that parent-child relationship to really break that cycle. And I really think in my long career and as a public health person, it's about breaking those cycles when possible. And so I encourage all of us to try to do that. This is the Changing Minds Now website. We're going to give you the reference to that. And these are those gestures that were in the video. And I think this is the healing gestures for young children. So I'm kind of recapping things. We're kind of coming to an end now, I think, and we'll have plenty of time for questions. I may have rushed too fast, I'm not sure. So celebrate, really creating nurturing and environments, recognizing efforts and support interests, and really finding, you know, sometimes it's getting them in a dance class, a drumming, comforting them, staying calm and patient, showing compassion, showing empathy, and creating a positive routine, actively listening, allow them to share, ask supportive questions, collaborate, teach problem-solving skills, encourage working together and model respective behavior, and identify strengths. I always tell my residents, you know, we also train residents in our institutions here. And I say, you can find a strength in any parent and in any child. I mean, every child has something that's beautiful about them, and every child has a strength. And we really need to find those beauties and those strengths and really support parents, because many parents don't get that support. So, and really explore new skills and try new things. And And this is a little about the role of physician. I don't think we have any physicians in there, so I don't know that how much we need to talk about this. But we are screening now, and we are a trusted relationship. And for many of our families, they really depend on their pediatrician, especially in our system, because we really care about them, and we can link them in. We have behavioral health on site. We have legal services available. We have food pantries in all of our sites. We even have resources to pay rent for some of our families if they're behind on their rent, and we advocate, and we're a voice for them. And I think physicians are good advocates, and people do listen to you many times. And I spend a lot of my time educating and advocating, both for health, economic, and justice, equity for our families. So in moving forward, I think we need to continue these mental health effects of COVID-19 and the emotional development of children. I'm very worried about the kids that aren't in school and aren't in preschool right now. I think they higher socioeconomic children, they all have tutors, they have lots of technology they can work with. Many of them can take the time to not work and be there to homeschool. But I think many of our families that are low income, they don't have that luxury. And so we've really been trying to advocate for them, acknowledging the history of racism in the US and its institution, and really unpacking these and going through this ongoing process. And then really looking for the assets and strengths in our families and to help them succeed. My other favorite book is How Children Succeed by Paul Tough, and I refer you all to that also. And then build on the children's strengths to help towards recovery, healing, and leading fulfilling lives. And then moving from tertiary to primary prevention. Primary prevention means that we are working upstream to prevent the trauma and adversity from occurring. And that's really where I'd like to see us, focus on, all of us in society. And this can be done through the schools in early childhood. Selective home visiting certainly addresses this. And then the secondary trauma, working with those who've experienced trauma and helping them heal from that trauma. And then the tertiary is working with them that have had the repeated extreme trauma with symptoms and signs, and really getting them into the right kind of services. The other thing that we're doing now is the ACEs Aware training. I don't know if you all know that pediatricians are now being paid to do the ACEs screening tool on a designated schedule, and that also looks at social determinants of health. And we're going to be doing that. We got selected to do some of that training. And then really looking at positive childhood experiences, asset-informed care, and recognizing the angels in our families, and really kind of going to that next level towards an asset-informed and healing care that engage everyone. And then we get back to your core values of, deep love, justice, authenticity and integrity, accountability and respect. I think these are amazing core values, and I commend you for those. And then this is Bruce Perry again. The more you can't have too many healthy relationships as a child. The more likely you will recover from trauma and thrive. Relationships are really the agent of change, and the most powerful therapy is human love. And those relationships can come through so many ways and from so many people. And I have people come up to me after I give this lecture. I've trained 400 parks and recs. I've trained the public defenders. I've trained the city attorney's office. We've trained mental health workers. People come up to me and say, I have a high ACE score. I had that trauma. And I said, well, you're successful. You have a job. You held down a job. You have a family. Who was it that helped you? And they always name someone. And sometimes it was their coach. And sometimes it was their minister. And sometimes it was the crossing guard. And sometimes it was their grandmother. So I think really those relationships are so powerful, and each of us can really be part of that web of relationships. And so I'm also going to end with Mr. Rogers. And even though I used to be so impatient with him as a parent, when I watched the documentary on him and watched the Tom Hanks movie, it meant so much more to me now than when my kids were young and I was much more impatient with life. We live in a world in which we need to share responsibility. It's easy to say it's not my child, not my community, not my world, not my problem. Then there are those who see the need and respond. And I consider those people my heroes. And that is what all of you are in this audience today. And I want to thank you for the work you do. So, and remember, adversity is not destiny, and love can conquer all this violence. So thank you.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Dr. Nicholas. We are ahead of schedule, so we have opportunity to answer questions. I was worried yesterday, everyone, that we weren't going to have enough time, and now we have time for questions.
You told me to cut it out and cut it down, so I did. And I mean, if we have time, we could add on Alicia Lieberman's Angels 5-minute video if you want, but it's totally up to you.
Let's see how the questions go. We do have a few questions for you, so we'll launch. I'll start with the simple one. Okay. Where are all your sites for TCC, and how long is the wait for a child to be seen there?
Children, so we're being very careful of how we're bringing children in. We have 13 sites, and we can send that link, and they're all in Long Beach. 2 are closed now because of COVID. We had to spread people out and do spacing. But we've been doing a lot of telephone visits, but we are taking new children. Pediatrics, we have a lot of capacity. There may sometimes is a wait for the adults, but we're hiring new adult providers. We're looking for medical assistants and LVNs. If anybody knows, go to TCC Family Health and look at our job board, because we have a lot of openings. It's a really, I think, a wonderful place to work. I'm a little biased. I've been here many years, and we have very special staff. So I think Erin can send you, we have our COVID-19 information sheet on our services and how to contact us. And we can add that in.
Okay, so Erin, you'll be posting that in the chat box. If you have,
if you have Medi-Cal, if they have Medi-Cal, they'll have to be assigned to us, so they can just change their assignment. And if they're uninsured, we can get them on programs, so that's not a problem. Okay, and we take a few private insurance, not a lot. Okay. Mostly it's Medi-Cal and uninsured.
So here's another question that we were posed. How do you feel about congregate care in the foster care system?
Oh, that's group homes?
Yes.
Yeah, I was looking at a lot of different videos online in the last week about children in the foster care system, because I haven't really thought about congregate care in a while. I think it's a challenge. I mean, part of it is the stigmatization. And I was telling Lori yesterday, one of the videos I watched was how the congregate care kids would get driven to school in a van. And on the van, it had the name of the foundation that donated the van. And so they drive up, and all the other kids in the school would have their parents drop them off, or they'd walk with friends. And I think it kind of increases the sense of otherness, that they're not the same as other kids. I wish we could have everybody in a small, loving family where they get individual attention. But I know that's not always possible. I would like to hear from the people in the audience what they think in the comment section, because I like to learn from the audience, and I often learn a lot from the audience. So I don't know if you can unmute people or if they can answer that question. I'd like to see what other people think of the comment.
So right now we've gotten a comment about RFA resource family approval is aimed at changing in terms of shifting from congregate care to more home-based with individual families. And that includes relatives being licensed, so they are on equity in terms of being reimbursed for the cost of care. Whereas before they would oftentimes get a different rate.
That's right. They would get a different rate. I think, and when I was on the commission overseeing the DCSF, they did a lot. This was a long time ago, and I think it's changed. They did a lot of assessment of the home environment, like the safety, the slats on the cribs and the smoke detectors, but they really didn't train the families in those emotional and psychosocial issues and the behaviors that these children would get. And I actually, because I was a pediatrician, I got assigned to review all the deaths in foster care for those years. It was was incredibly challenging for me. It was very hard to do. And what I realized that I think they weren't getting the training in the basic developmental things. And that's why I mentioned the, toileting issues at age 3, because I had seen a child that was killed, because they had had a stooling accident. And so I think it's better now. And the real training from, like that toolkit from the AAP on foster and adoptive parents, I think that kind of training is incredibly important. And I've had all these conversations. I remember I was on an airplane once with someone, I was talking to them about my work, and they were talking about the child that they had adopted. And this child had had such complex trauma, and they were struggling so much to find the right kind of services and therapy for this child. And it's very hard. Not every child that is in foster care. And I had some kids that did very well when they were young. And then when they became teens and they went through their hormonal changes, he ended up in jail. And as a young child, he was a model child. And so it's a big challenge. So if people are even in congregate care or in homes, I want to make sure they're getting the training and the support for those kind of behavioral and psychosocial issues, and really for the parents to know how to respond and handle it, and that people are really watching that, because that's my big fear.
And this next question ties right into that perfectly. Have you found it helpful to share the information with parents, caregivers about how the trauma and the brain the trauma affects the children's brain and how they react and behave?
I think explaining, I don't like to talk about how the brain's damaged, because I think that's really not, I think, again, I don't want the child stigmatized. I don't want people to give up on them. But I think explaining that the trauma that they went through, either intrauterine, and I'm all thinking about all my patients I've followed through the years, the trauma that they had intrauterинely, exposed to maternal drugs, probably abuse at the beginning of their thing. And then, and then the behavior they have, trying to explain that behavior, that it's not their fault, I think is incredibly helpful. And, kids for a while, and I think all of you probably remember, the kids were getting kicked out of preschool. I had never seen a child kicked out of preschool, really. And then all of a sudden, there were all these kids being kicked out of preschool because they were acting out and being violent. I think that's not happening as much now, because I think we're educating the childcare providers a little bit and recognizing what's going on with those kids. But that was a big challenge, for me when I saw this. The beauty of my ability to still see children and also run an organization and do policy work is that I have my own little study group that I can follow and see. And it's really, it's much lower now, just like kids not being kicked out for oppositional defiance disorder anymore. But I think explaining why the child may be doing that, or explaining why they may be doing what they're doing and their reactions. And I think that one of the most important things, and Folletti, who did the ACEs study, will say, is just having someone say to you, you're not alone in this, and it wasn't your fault, the parent who was abused. And I think it's really important to ask what their childhood was like. I think it's good to do the ACEs, but I really think it's those open-ended questions that are the most important. Like, what was your childhood like? How are you doing as a mom right now? And asking them what is their biggest fear. And we get some amazing answers when we ask that. What are your dreams for your child? And what are your fears for your child? And I won't say what one mother said, so it's not. Anyway, but really asking those, and then telling people they're not alone. There's so many people that have been through this, and we have help for you if you want it. Or, wow, you went through all that, and you're here, and you made it to this well child visit with your child to get their immunizations on time, and I commend you for that. And really, that positive, reinforcement. And can we help you? Do you want to address this? And I think you have to identify the trauma initially, but once you identify that trauma, I think that part of the healing is identifying the strengths and the assets in that person. And that's what our behavioral health, staff does. And that's what we're trying to do here also. And I think the other thing I didn't touch on is that in your organizations, you will have people that have gone through these same things, and you need to be aware and know that you know, if you're going to go down this route and train, that some people will be at the back of the room and you'll think they're not interested or they don't want to really learn this. And it's because they've had issues in their life. And this was bringing back some difficult memories. And every time I've done a training, either there've been people at the back who have walked out, I give people permission, or people that look really disengaged. And then somebody always comes up after and asks me questions. And so I'm happy to be able to help, you know, give them support and give some referrals. So
I really liked how you touched on identifying and reframing, because many of the parents coming in, because they're in child welfare, are on the defensive.
Yes.
And reframing and identifying strengths that are there and building on those existing strengths is a much more positive approach and a better way to build a bridge, because we know our young children need their caregiving adults involved.
Yes.
And they have had loss just by fact that they're in this system. Mm-hmm. And they've had a traumatic loss if they've been removed from their parent.
And I had the honor to see a family. It's one of my 2-generation families. Mm-hmm. So I've been seeing patients for a long time, and I don't see them as much as I used to, but I saw the children with the grandparents, and, you know, they told me their story. I didn't know what had been going on. And the kids were doing really, really well. And then, you know, they got put back with their mother, and I had this, you know, this vision of the mom and, you know, the things that had happened. And then, but, you know, she had gotten help and she had turned her life around, and the kids were so happy to be with her. They love their grandparents, you know, they love their grandparents, and those grandparents were a savior and they're still in their lives, but they also love their mom and they love their dad. And, you know, many children, they all, you know, there are still the angels in those relationships, and mm-hmm. those relationships are very important. And so I'm looking forward to hearing the next lecture in the series, because I think, you know, someone said to me, and I think I told you this story, Lori, I was at a ACEs conference that Center for Youth Wellness put on a couple of years ago. And the 4CA steering committee that I'm on, we were doing strategic planning. And there was a young man who had been in foster care for years in multiple homes. And he had graduated college and actually came to our clinic. He lived in Long Beach. I said, "Oh, do you know the children's clinic?" He goes, "Yes, I come there." I'm like, "Wow, that's very cool." But he said to me, if my parents had gotten the financial support that the foster system put into foster parents to put me in that system, a lot of the stressors in their lives would have been removed. And they might not have, you know, been so angry or short fused or, you know, done this. And that was like, I thought about that. And sometimes we put so much money into them being in foster care, where we could put the money into really the concrete supports in times of need and the training for that family so they can keep them at home. And that was so touching to me. And I replay that conversation often in my mind.
Mm-hmm. And those protective factors are important. And I think when we're looking at children who are leaving the system with their families, making sure we're collaborating with the parents to identify factors and that are in place outside the system, that are not funded through the child welfare system, so that if they leave, they don't come back.
Yes.
And have further trauma.
And the other is, I mean, I was on a panel with the National Institute of Health talking about childhood adversity at UC Irvine, probably 5 years ago. And there was a father whose child had been taken away and was in foster care. And they placed the child so far away. He was given visitation, but the child was placed so far away that he could never see them. He had to travel for an hour on the bus, and he couldn't make it there as often as he had wanted. Or when I was on the panel for children of incarcerated parents, the parents were placed hours away, and they couldn't even get in to touch them or see them. And so, you know, they had worked very hard. And I think now they're placing them closer so the children can see those parents, so they can maintain those relationships. And now in some, you know, prisons, they have father-daughter dances and different ways to keep that connection, because that connection is important.
Mm-hmm. Very much so. So I have a long question for you that's come in.
Okay.
As Ross says, what screening tools would be best to advocate for which trauma / ACEs, etc.? I'm finding the child welfare standard KDA assessments are screening out young children too often for mental health services.
What do you mean screening out? What does that mean? They don't need them?
They're not finding them, I'm guessing they're not finding them positive for trauma. So there's something DCFS uses called the mental health screening tool.
Yeah, I don't know what that is. Okay.
Okay, it's a short, I want to say 10 question. I could be mischaracterizing it. But it's a screening that social workers use. And if it is positive, that means it's positive for trauma. And then they will refer to Department of Mental Health. And then it gets referred out for mental health services. So I think the question has to do with what kind of screening can a CASA, if appointed, or somebody else who maybe is involved in the child's life that could maybe identify trauma in order to facilitate mental health services.
Yeah. That's a hard one. What I'd like the CASA, and we can talk about this later. I mean, I don't have the answer to that.
Okay.
You know, I know what I know and I know what I don't know. But I do know that you know, having the CASA advocates being attuned to those developmental signs and symptoms that we went through that are in that document that I keep referring to is really important. So screening tools are okay, but I think it's that interpersonal assessment. And then, you know, if they have some of those signs and symptoms, I think, you know, letting the pediatrician know and having the pediatrician, they should be, you know, getting trained. And we are now doing the pearls and some of the ACEs, but we do for the older child a PSC 17 that looks at depression and anxiety. We do the PEDS, which is developmental screening. So we now do a lot of screening in our organization. And so you want to make sure they're in a practice where the doctors have been trained to do that. And I think that's why DCFS would always bring us so many.
So they could, you're suggesting maybe the advocates talk to the pediatrician about doing PEDS,
well, no,
ages and stages.
Well, yeah, they could, or just, I'm worried about this child. This child has, you know, gone through trauma. You know, do you think they need a mental health referral? You know, these are the signs and symptoms I'm seeing. I would, you know, I'd like you to assess them and see if you think they need a referral. So I think, you know, I don't know that I'd tell them what, because they're not going to respond very happily to somebody telling them what to do. I mean, I don't personally, but I think some pediatricians, we're not a very egotistical group as compared to other doctors. We're probably the most down to earth specialty because we take care of kids. But I think really, you know, telling them the signs and symptoms and that things you're concerned about. But not every child, if they get in a good placement, needs, you know, intensive mental health services. They need stability. They may need a therapeutic preschool. I mean, getting them into early Head Start and a really good, you know, Head Start program is also helpful. They do some screenings and they do a lot of observation, and many Head Starts, at least in Long Beach, they have For the Child, I think was going to be on this, somebody from For the Child has people actually in preschools doing assessments. So I think that's actually even a better way. They do observation, they do some screening tools. I think, you know, screening tools are screening tools, and, you know, if you get a positive, you get it. But I think there are other ways to also, I don't think it's the end all.
Okay.
Personally.
One of the questions is, what was Mr. Rogers' quote again that you shared as part of your presentation?
Let's see. Okay, there we go.
And as you're looking up, a lot of people are saying, thank you for the presentation. Very informative, very helpful. Many people want copies of the Zoom recording of this.
Okay, let's see. Oh, now what did I do? I'm trying to get back. Oh, now I'm through that thing again. I can't go back.
And thank you, Charisse, for sharing the MHSD. DCFS folks on here.
I'm going to read you, and thank you, DCSF folks. I hope I wasn't negative about DCSF. It's a very hard job. And okay, I'm going to read you the Mr. Rogers because I have it written down, but I can't figure out how to work it. We live in a world in which we need to share responsibility. It's easy to say it's not my child, not my community, not my world, not my problem. Then there are those who see the need and respond. I consider those people my heroes. So we just Googled inspirational quotes from Mr. Rogers and found this one. God bless the internet. So
Okay.
We can post that. Maybe Erin can post that in the chat.
Okay. Thank you, Erin. And we have somebody, another question was, are there any upcoming ballots that are particularly important for young children?
Oh, ballot initiatives?
Mm-hmm.
You know, my son's been bugging me about what are we going to vote on the propositions, Mom? He's my special needs son and he's very into voting. I haven't sat down and gone through them all, and I haven't gone to my professional associations to see. So I don't have that answer yet. I promised him I'd try to look this weekend. So if anybody knows, that's another one. People can chat. I know that I think Children Today had some that they were supporting. Other people, 0 to 3, if they're on here, they usually know, but those are the groups that I would look for. So maybe, yeah, if 0 to 3 has some they're supporting. So.
Okay. Another question, and I'm not, maybe they can clarify this. Someone would like to see the video that was referenced by Dr. Nicholas. I'm not sure if that's the angels.
The angels, just,
we posted it in the chat box, both CASA and Erin.
Alicia, I just love Alicia Lieberman. She's amazing. And she's the one that developed the CPP therapy, but she's just so kind and talks about how we can all help to heal. She's wonderful. She's really one of my favorite people. And so I just Googled her name and this one popped up in the middle of the night. I was doing that. Yeah.
We posted both a short and a longer version of her video in the chat box. So if you want to see that video, if that's
what just put something up in the chat about Measure J. You want to tell us about what that is? Can Wendy know? Hi, Wendy.
Oh, that must be our Wendy, maybe.
Yes, it's Wendy Julian. Yes.
Hello. Wendy, if you want to email me your question, I will post it for you. I will ask.
They're supporting Measure J to help increase funding for needed social services. Hi, Wendy.
Okay, we have some more questions that came in.
Okay.
Can you talk about the importance of sibling relationships for children under 5?
Yeah, that's heartbreaking to me when I see siblings broken up. I mean, if the more we can do to keep siblings together, the better in my mind. That is so heartbreaking to me. You know, and I hear these stories and I think it's super important to try to keep them together and try to find families to take them and try to prevent them from getting into the foster care system, you know, and really going as upstream as possible. I mean, I think that is the key. Is I've come to almost want, you know, a guaranteed base income for families because poverty, it's getting worse. The crowding's getting worse. The more crowding you have, that's the other thing. The more crowding that you have, the more abuse you have. People need some space. And I've been around so long to be through several cycles of recessions. And what we're seeing now is some of the worst crowding that I've ever seen. And people can't afford housing and they have to work 2 or 3 jobs. And, you know, and is it a crime to be poor? And is it, you know, so what can we do to support those families so they don't get into the system and they don't break up siblings? I think it's incredibly important to keep siblings together. I don't know if that's the question, but.
I think you just answered the question.
Okay.
This is another question that came through. The culture in congregate care is traumatizing. Staff operate, oops, this just moved. My questions moved, sorry. Staff operate the pretense that if I do my job right, I must be feared. Have you heard of Cornelius Frederick? Oh, it must be, he recently died when staff restrained him for throwing a sandwich.
No, I've heard horror stories and, you know, I always read those articles in the newspaper and it's just so heartbreaking to me. And, I think we just need enough resources to get the kids in the right place and to prevent. I mean, I just think if we can talk about, you know, supports for families early on. I mean, the home visiting programs, you know, we could do a whole, you know, 2 hours on this. And, you know, Healthy Families America, they decrease kids going into foster care. If you can get our families get such attention, the ones that are listed as high risk that go into our Healthy Families America program. We have like 8 home visitors now that are in our organization with funding and hopefully the funding will continue, because Project Dulce ended. We had funding and then it ended, and we're trying to figure out how to continue. But we still have increased in the selective home visiting funding. But you know, what that does is keep those kids out of the foster care system. And I think the more resources that you have early, why don't we have early childhood education, universal childcare? I mean, my staff struggles. I mean, they don't have places. It's so expensive. And if parents could have their children in high quality early childhood where they engage the parents and do education, and they have a break sometimes also, I mean, I really think that would decrease, and you could identify issues early through that. I think, and, you know, supporting pediatricians to have the time to do the kind of screenings when they're coming in, because most kids are coming in to get their pediatric care. And in many cases, we're the only people that are seeing some of these families outside of the home, because not all of them are in early childhood education. And so, I mean, really making sure we're training them. And I think the ACEs Aware training is going to help that. But having the resources, I mean, we have the resources. If we have a family, we can call the behavioral health person. We've worked very hard to build that part of our care through the years, but not every practice has that. And Long Beach is incredibly blessed with some of the best child mental health services. I mean, we do not have a paucity of child mental health services in Long Beach. We have a really high quality and a wonderful system, so we can get people into that. But you know, it's destigmatizing. There's not as much stigma when it's right in the pediatrician's office, because there is that stigma of going out. And so just really trying to go as upstream as possible. Early child care, you know, making sure families have enough money to live and that they have food. I mean, when we did our EBI screen, we had 38% of our families have food insecurity. That's why we trained 20 people to be CalFresh enrollers and have food pantries in all of our clinics now, and have a farmer's market every week for our patients. We've given away 56,000 tons of fruits and vegetables since COVID started. Is that the role of a health center? Well, it's what's needed right now. And many people are giving away food and that, but that's what's really important, is showing people that you care and helping them not feel isolated and alone, and helping them have the ability. I mean, you know, I could talk forever. During the Colin Powell was Promise for Youth or something years ago. It was after he was Secretary of Defense. He started this program. And the program was to have strangers come and take the kids to Disneyland. And it offended me so much, because I thought about, and had take the kids out to eat and take them here and take them there. I thought about my families that are working 2 jobs. On the weekend, they're cleaning the house all day, and they never have the money or the ability to take the child to Disneyland or to take them for dinner. But then the stranger comes and can take them. And I would say to myself, why don't we give the parents the money to do this and give them the tickets to Disneyland with a coupon so that they could feed their family there and they could go as a family to that? But that was, you know, people didn't think about that. So we spend all this money and effort to have other people doing that. And I think Big Brother and Big Sister is great. But I think a lot of times I know these families, I have relationships with them, and I love them. And most of them are wonderful people. And if they had the ability, you know, and the time to do that, send someone in to clean their house once a month so they can do something with their kids, rather than doing all these other, you know, peripheral things around them. So I think to me, that's one of my soapboxes. Thank you.
One of your soapboxes. Okay. 2 things. One is my question I'm going to ask. Where do you recommend, or what do you believe is the best website to go to get a sense of developmental milestones? I usually recommend going to CDC because they have a wonderful app that you can download on your phone, whether it's an iPhone or the other type of phone, which I'm forgetting. But that's one of them. Do you recommend going there, or 0 to 3? Or...
I like 0 to 3. I like the CDC one. I don't know their app, but I know their handouts were very helpful. You know, because of the PED screening tool, they say, you know, are they delayed? But but to know that, you have to either live with a relative or in a village or have had other kids, but it's not intuitive what normal development is. And the CDC has those guidelines that are really helpful. So I think the CDC is good. 0 to 3 is good. For violence in the home and thing, I love Futures Without Violence. The Connected Parents, Connected Kids. That's a good prevention video and a card that I recommend. We can send you that. We're developing a curriculum with Futures Without Violence to train the community about trauma and adversity and how to prevent it and understand it. That should be done within a year, and hopefully we'll be able to share that with people and train people and train trainers. And so we're really excited about that. And the AAP has good stuff too.
Okay. Couple other questions. Somebody sent this question twice. What do you do with the child who is over affectionate? You mentioned that earlier, that it's concern when your patient is really, really affectionate and clingy with you.
Yeah, I really have a discussion with them and find out how are things at home and has anything happened, and then I see them back because I want to, I kind of quietly explore for abuse and neglect going on in the home. Same with a kid. I mean, if, this is rather graphic for non-medical people, but, we do full exams on children. That's what you're supposed to do. And I was trained in child sexual abuse exams. And so if I'm going to look at their genitals, if a child is just like totally limp during that and not fighting me, I get really worried because that's not a normal response. So a good pediatrician, they know the normal way kids respond. It just may be that, but sometimes I've been worried about some kids that are just have extreme social anxiety, and that's part of because they then have social mutism, selective mutism, which is a social anxiety, and they just may be an anxious kid. And I've gone through this whole workup, and I have them back. I talk to the mom, I talk to the brother. So not all of those kids that are like that or that are cowering in the corner of my exam room the whole time. Many of those have just turned out to be extremely shy kids. And, so it's really following, kids will either get better, get worse, or stay the same. And, but identifying as early and really talking, alone to the mom and see what's going on.
Or the dad, depending on the
dad, if they're there, but they're not always there. And if the dad is there, trying to figure out how you talk to each of the dad and mom separately, because I've been burned several times with a dad who always came in with a mom for her visit. And I thought, oh, how nice. I mean, the father's always coming in for the visit. And then one day the mom came in alone, and turns out she's a victim of domestic violence, and he wouldn't let her come in alone. So you always have to be careful. And I now with a new mom, and I haven't had a new mom and dad, in a while, if the dads come in, I always say I need to talk to each of you alone, because I want to make sure that neither of you have postpartum depression, and I want to talk to you alone, because postpartum depression is a big risk factor, and we do screen for that, and we should be screening for that. That's supposed to be doing universal screening for that. So I try to get them alone, and then when they're alone, I go towards the window, not close to the door, and try to ask if if they're feeling safe, and if they feel. A lot of times it's just overly controlling, sometimes it turns out it does go into an abusive relationship. So I think just being aware, but then also looking for the strengths. But so yes,
balancing act.
I try to talk to them together. I try to talk to them separately if I can. And I'm usually pretty successful in doing that, but you have to frame it the right way.
Okay. One of the questions was what was the book you recommended by Paul?
How Children Succeed. Yeah, and of course the one that everybody loves is the Bessel van der Kolk, The Body Keeps the Score, which is very beautifully written. And then Bruce Perry's books are great too. I haven't read Alicia Lieberman's books, so she's got, a lot of toddler mental health books, but I love hearing her speak, and she's really. And
we uploaded Dr. Perry's website into the chat box while you were speaking. So
good. And the other one is the Center for the Developing Child. Jack Shonkoff's work and his videos are great. And I usually show like 4 of those, but I would have had more videos, but you told me to hurry.
Dr. Shonkoff, the Center for the Developing Child, is also
Yes.
uploaded into the chat box, the link there.
Yeah, that's a really good site. And then, the Changing Minds Now is a really interactive, changingmindsnow.org, and that was paid for by DOJ and Futures on Violence worked on that. I'm not a fan of the cracked brain. I find it offensive and I find it negative and not asset. But I really like the circles and the ability to go by different ages, and they give you ideas of how positive assets, things you can do with the children by age and by, they have the schools and the community and the individuals. And so that I really like that. It's a very interactive website.
Okay. Well, one last question, and then we're going to be wrapping up because we're at 1:54. What about older siblings that are not welcoming toddler siblings? Any references to go to?
That are not
welcoming the younger siblings. So sibling rivalry with older siblings and toddlers.
How much older do they mean? Like a 6-year-old or?
It didn't say.
Well, I think the most important thing is to pay attention to both of them. And it's the same thing with if one of the children is disabled and the other one isn't. And it's very hard to balance. I know because of I have a disabled son and a non-disabled daughter. And, trying to figure out, when the baby's sleeping, to pay attention to the other child. They need, they've many times been displaced. And how do you make sure that you have that individual time? And then, when it's safe, engage them in caring for the baby and, learning that they're not just this blob that cries and goes to the bathroom. And as they grow older, I think that hopefully they'll be more engaged. I used to incorporate you hear these stories of people that, my sister just ran away. We're 20 months apart. We're incredibly close now. But when my mom brought me home, she just ran away and just started sobbing, because she was the first child and there I was. And, my first memory is of my mom breastfeeding my sister who's 3 years younger. That's my first memory. And I'm sure it was because, I'm not the baby anymore, So I think those are very, those are hard transitions, and just acknowledging that and really I bought my son a baby doll when I had my daughter, and it ended up looking just like her. She was bald and a little cute. And, so he got a baby and I had a baby. So
I did something called date nights with each of the children.
Yeah.
When they were younger. And it could be something as simple as we'd go get hot chocolate.
Exactly.
When they couldn't read, I'd read to them, and then it became parallel reading or looking at books. So that's something to think about. But I want to be respectful of your time and our audience's time. I want to thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Dr. Nicholas, thank you. Thank you. Don't leave. I want you to be able to read the chat box because there's lots of wonderful comments for you in there. Okay. But I want to thank all our attendees for coming in today. And I apologize about having you come early. I wasn't quite sure what to expect when the webinar was going to open. So next week, you're going to use the same link that you received from Zoom for today, but you can log in about 11:45 or 11:50, and then we'll be opening the doors to the webinar at 11:55. Next week, we will be covering collaboration with parents. We have a wonderful panel who I know is chomping at the bit to share with you all and respond to some of the things shared today. I'm hoping that we'll be sending out a recording of the webinar on Monday, if I understand Zoom webinar correctly, and it's been a learning experience. So I thank you all so much for joining us and participating. Yes, and I do have a comment here from one of the panelists. He is chomping at the bit, excited to talk next week. But I thank you all for joining us. Hopefully you were able to get all that information out of the chat box. And we will see you next Friday. Remember, log in about 11:45. We'll open the Zoom webinar doors at 11:55. And have a wonderful afternoon and a wonderful evening. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Okay, let's turn.